Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 of our English 3180 online course. I'm so glad that you're all here. And I just wanted to take the first bit of this week's video to give a bunch of air fives or through the screen high fives. I don't know. Please don't actually high five your computer screen. That might be bad. I just wanted to give everyone mad props for how enthusiastically and thoroughly you guys have already been engaging with this course. I am really proud of you. There haven't been, I don't think, any fully no-shows in the class. Almost everybody has already participated fully in their discussions and their reading responses, with a few exceptions of some late ad folks, but I know you guys are going to get in there. So it's really awesome to see everybody just jumping on board and getting into the readings. Awesome. I can already tell it's going to be a really fun semester. So having said all of that, I read your chat check-ins about which breakfast food you would be, and those were delightful. I feel a kindred spiritness with all of you, a kinship, if you will. I love breakfast food and I love reading about it, and I'm weirdly hungry now. But I just loved seeing everybody's personalities in your chats, and I hope to see more of that as we go throughout the semester. It's just a funny, weird way for us to all kind of hang out and get to know each other. Speaking of, chat check-in number 2 prompt will be placed at the end of this video, just to keep us all on our toes and a little bit of accountability for watching them. Having said those things, I will just say that this week we are talking about the sophists, and in particular, the Platonic view of sophistry. So y'all know it's not great. But we're going to get into it, and we're going to think about how it affects all of the Western canon and lots of good stuff. So I'm going to head over to my screen share view, and I will do a quick mini lecture just covering the high points. I'm really not going to go that much into depth with this week's readings. As I try to every week, I want to leave you guys enough space to do your own analysis and your own interpretation as you work through your reading responses and your group discussions. But this will hopefully help you if you felt like something just didn't stick at all, or if you were really lost in one of the readings in particular. I'll be giving you sort of my synopsis, bringing my scholarly experience to bear on the readings to just kind of give you a framework for how to think about them this week. So having said all of that, I will jump over to our screen share and we'll do our mini lecture. Okay. So here in week 2, we're thinking about Plato, and we're thinking about the sophists, the earliest teachers and practitioners of rhetoric. And today I really want to highlight the concept of the other, and how in the Platonic dialogues, sophists in particular, but also women, are used as the other side of the dialectic for Plato, and as we'll see, for many other white guys in the canon that come after him. And that's kind of why I have this beautiful pink screen with the green plane. It's kind of going off to the side, like the other. I don't know. Maybe I was trying too hard for that symbolism. But the two pieces, I didn't have you guys go into depth with either one of these pieces because I wanted to give you samples of Plato from both his early dialogues and his later dialogues. So Gorgias is from the earlier stuff. This is where Plato sets up kind of a classic Socratic dialogue with the figure of the older Socrates. He's the expert. He's going to really put Gorgias on the spot. Gorgias? Not sure about the pronunciation there. The famous sophist, basically, is Gorgias. I'm going to go with Gorgias because that makes me think of gorgeous, and that's just fun to say. Socrates is putting him to the test here, right? He's kind of missed him in a performance, in a dialogue or a extemporaneous speaking engagement. And Socrates is like, all right, dude, you're supposed to be so great. Let's see how you do. And here, Plato is using the dialectic, this style of logical argumentation. So would you say? Well, if then, could you say blah, blah, blah? Right? The call and response, right? And you can totally see that poor Gorgias, he is immediately refuted on every single point he makes, right? And Socrates goes to great lengths to sort of explain why he's, wrong. But some of the key points here is that, Plato is setting up through Socrates a disagreement with the sophist school, which basically Plato is maintaining that words by themselves, or like the craftsmanship and the manipulation of words, isn't a thing, right? Plato's like, no, the words have to be about something. They have to have content, right? You can't have a science of words if you don't talk about something sciencey, basically. And so this really sets up something that has been either directly or indirectly debated throughout like all of humanity's scholarship, right? Is there a subject if you're talking about writing? And most rhetoricians will say like, yeah, the subject is writing. But then that gets you into like a whole spiral of like, well, then what's the subject? Is it process? Is it content? Is it cognition? So here is sort of like one of the earliest representations of that. And Gorgias, he's trying to, well, at least Plato is showing him as being very adaptive to the line of questioning that Socrates is putting to him, right? And so Gorgias keeps answering the questions differently. And Plato points to this as a sign of his inconsistency. So that adaptability here, Plato's like, well, see, that proves that you're a flip-flopper, basically. And I didn't give you guys the whole dialogue. If you want to, it's like open access. You can find it pretty much anywhere on the internet. But I wanted to leave space for us to look at the Sophist, which is one of the late dialogues of Plato. Here we see Socrates is younger, and it's a much less antagonistic conversation. It's less of a full-on dialectic and more of a call and response between collaborators, right? The stranger is presented in much more favorable terms than Gorgias is. But the point here in the Sophist is to get to the definition, right? And the excerpt I gave you guys is from the beginning of the piece. It's fascinating to me because it's going through this heuristic that is really reminiscent of the Aristotelian hierarchy classification of organisms, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And I just think that this is a fascinating fixture of early Greek philosophy, that it's got to be within this sort of dialectic or dichotomy of if it's this, it's this, if it's that, it's that, and it can't be both, and it can't be neither. And that's sort of the pattern that we see in this dialogue. I think it's really interesting, though, that at the end, kind of in contrast to that search for the yes-no answer, where they kind of land is that a sophist is a many-sided creature, slippery, and, then they later on in the dialogue, they're going to get into like really existential ideas of being and non-being. And again, you can read the full dialogue. It's open access. You can access it very many different places on the interwebs. But so the two secondary sources that I wanted you guys to read that kind of play off of these two Platonic dialogues. The first is the Muckelbauer piece, and here he is doing a traditional rhetorical move, right? A lot of rhetorical scholars take pieces of, rhetorical canon from Plato all the way up through, more modern day, what we would think of as more modern day authors. And they're going to, walk through it step by step and kind of do rhetorical and slightly literary feeling analysis. So for those of you who've done literary analysis, this might feel really familiar. To walk through a text doing more of a close reading of it and kind of talk about what's happening and put the author in conversation with other scholars. So that's what Mucklebauer's doing here, but he's doing it, the thing that's interesting is that he's using the sophist as his source material, which he says is an important source, but one that up until the time of this article wasn't really given a lot of attention, right? The Phaedrus gets a lot of attention, Gorgias gets a lot of attention, but the sophist, not so much. Maybe for those reasons, you know, Mucklebauer says of like talking about being and non-being, and that might be too, you know, woo-woo for some rhetoricians, but he talks about how this is a great place to look for Plato's ideas about sophism. Whether or not they were correct, we could get into debate. But I think this piece is really interesting because Mucklebauer points out that we really see how Plato is devoted to this idea of someone being well-born or elite, right? Plato really treasured this idea because he was an elite, a well-born Greek citizen. So he did not like the idea of sophists teaching and educating whoever would pay them, right? So like you could be wealthy but not well-born, and you could get educated in the arts of persuasion and rhetoric, and Plato did not like this. He was very politically opposed to that idea, which, if we really pressed into that and interrogated it, is an undemocratic idea, right? But it really shows us something about Plato's elitism, that he's very concerned with the stranger's birth and status, and that kind of comes up at the beginning and the end of the Sophist. And though we did say this is a less antagonistic piece, it's very interesting that the whole conversation with the stranger is a little bit tense because you don't know who the stranger is. Is the stranger a sophist? You know, like sleeping with the enemy or something. But I think it's really interesting that Plato really hones in on the fact that the stranger and the speaker identify a sophist as someone who does not specialize in a subject matter. So this echoes what we saw in Gorgias, right? That Plato's really interested both in this elitism, but he's also interested in real knowledge versus the appearance of knowledge, which he says the sophists are really just seeming to be knowledgeable about many subjects, but a true philosopher would demonstrate real knowledge about one narrow subject. And this gets into what Mucklebauer really hones in on at the second half of his paper, which is the use of these two terms, the copy and the simulacrum. The copy would be someone like a student or a protege of a philosopher who you would look to see, if we look at the copy, we can see the quality of the teacher. And the simulacrum, for those of you who don't know that term, it just means like an image or a reproduction of something that's not the actual thing. Now, I know in our days of like scanners, photocopiers, digital photography, it seems like a copy and a simulacrum are the same, but in this case, they're not supposed to be, right? The simulacrum is something that's supposed to be much more artificial, and, you know, Mucklebauer points out that they talk about how, a child could be fooled by a simulacrum, but, you know, not by a copy. A copy is more the real thing. So in the end, Mucklebauer basically kind of takes us to the conclusion of saying, like, this is interesting what we can see about Plato's knowledge of sophistry, his motivations for being antagonistic towards sophistry, and how he gets from A to B, which is kind of the rhetorical part of this analysis. Mucklebauer uses the journey that we're on and our guide moving through without a map. And that's what those are all kind of pointing to, is how Plato is getting from point A to point B in the Sophist. Okay, now I saved maybe the juiciest for last, because Susan Jarrett's piece about feminism and sophistry is really interesting, and it fits in nicely with our overall course goals of interrogating white male patriarchal canon within rhetorical history. So Jarrett is going to make some claims for us, and one of the main things she's going to do is talk about how sophistic rhetoric, she's not trying to claim that like ancient Greek sophists were feminists, because I think there's a lot of evidence that not all of them, very few of them even acknowledged women. So like we can't make that claim. But she does make the claim that many modern day feminist theorists are finding purchase in philosophical and rhetorical circles by using sophistic rhetorical strategies. So she talks about that, and at the same time sort of interrogates the Western traditional canon by showing how sophists and women are both used together as the other in many, many, many Western canonical dialectics, right? So she goes through from Plato all the way down to Nietzsche, through Derrida, right? So like she's talking about how women and sophists have this in common. They're basically used as the other. And I love this quote here where she talks about how both rhetoric and women are trivialized. And this is because they are identified with sensuality, costume, and color, all of which are supposed to be manipulated in attempts to persuade through what? Deception. Right. So this is how we are seeing the sophists and women brought together is under this umbrella of deception, right? Rhetoric is going to try to persuade you with some fancy words. And women, of course, are just sin in the body. What are you going to do? So this is really interesting because Jarrett then goes on to show how modern feminist theorists use sophistic techniques, things like being able to hold a contradiction, like two contradicting things, and not saying it's if then, right? But saying, hey, I think we need to just say both. Both are true. Or talking about historical contingency. This is especially relevant to our class because this is kind of thinking about how, history is written by the winners. And what are you not seeing in a historical account that might lead you to have more knowledge or more thorough knowledge of the situation? Oh no, I did a typo. Sorry guys, I just looked at my slide and it says Kairos. It's supposed to say Kairos, Kairos, which is a term that has meant many things, but here it sort of means like timeliness and appropriateness for the audience. And this is a technique that was sort of introduced and popularized by the sophists, and that some feminist theorists have really made use of that sort of timeliness argument for lots of reasons to think about why women throughout rhetorical history have or have not been given credit, or their writings have or have not been given credit. And then rhetorical exigency is her last piece, which she kind of brings to bear, thinking about, I believe it's in Sisu. So that's a lot. I know it's like quite daunting to smush these two excerpts of dialogues by Plato and these two kind of really hefty scholarly pieces together into one very short mini lecture. But I hope that I've been able to pull out some highlights for you. And I'm going to pull back to my full view and close out this video. Okay. So this week, your chat check-in to prompt. It's pretty gray out today. So I'm just going to pull the easiest punch I can here. Well, that's not the right metaphor. Give you the easiest pitch, maybe? I don't know. Too many sports metaphors. But I want to know, are you a sunny day person or a gray day person? I like them both. I really enjoy a beautiful sunny day as much as the next person, but something about these early September gray days feel really nice, right? I wore a sweater today. That's nice. I mean, it's nice now. Talk to me again in February when I'm like, I can't wear another sweater. So that's your chat check-in prompt for this week. Are you a sunny day person or gray day person? Why? And just one quick note to encourage you to make sure that you are participating in your discussions with enough time so that everybody can comment fully on everybody else's stuff. I know that it's kind of a tricky thing that I've quantified the responses, but just please kind of keep in mind that the whole reason I'm assigning a collaborative discussion in these small groups is so that you guys can benefit from the back and forth that happens when we both present our views to other people, but also when we get some pushback on them. Questions, clarifications, agreements, but extending on them for different reasons. That's the value of the discussion assignment. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for as we move forward throughout the semester. Okay, I think that's all I have for you guys. Email me if you have any questions, especially about this week's readings. I'm also happy to schedule you guys in for office hours or, like Zoom hours. So let me know if you need to chat or have any questions. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of the week and enjoy the sweater weather. Bye, everybody.